So I said, well, why don't you just leave us? Because you running me crazy. I'm the worst person to take advice from on a woman, you know.
In 1972, with a single movie theme, Bobby Womack became the unofficial voice of Harlem, a sound shaped by poverty, violence, and a city at war with itself. Across 110th Street was more than a soundtrack. It was a social indictment, restricted on radio, yet destined to outlive the film that carried it. That success came at a cost. Hollywood didn't expand his image, it locked him into one. For decades after, Womack's music echoed through crime films and urban stories, while the man behind the voice slipped into addiction, broken relationships, and declining health. Then, in 1997, a new generation rediscovered him when a director resurrected that same song, not as a present-tense artist, but as nostalgia, a relic of a harsher America. As cinema continued to celebrate his voice, Bobby Womack's real life was quietly unraveling. So the question remains, what really happened to Bobby Womack? Across 110th Street, 1972. In 1972, Across 110th Street was released at a moment when New York City was recording over 1,600 homicides a year, and Harlem had become a national symbol of urban collapse. The film itself was modest in budget, but its impact multiplied the moment Bobby Womack's voice opened the story. The title song was written and recorded specifically for the film, clocking in at just 3 minutes and 48 seconds, yet it captured an entire social reality: unemployment, drugs, racial tension, and survival north of a single street line. Several radio stations limited airplay, citing its bleak lyrics and explicit social tone, even as the song climbed into the Billboard R&B Top 20. The irony was immediate. The movie faded from mainstream conversation within a few years, while the song refused to disappear. By the mid-1970s, Across 110th Street had become Womack's defining work, permanently linking his name to crime cinema and urban despair. One film, one song, 1 year, and a reputation that would follow him for the rest of his life. Hollywood typecast after crime film success. After 1972, the impact of Across 110th Street reshaped how Bobby Womack was perceived inside the film industry. In the 5 years following the movie's release, Womack received multiple soundtrack inquiries, yet nearly all of them shared the same criteria: urban settings, crime narratives, and stories centered on Black hardship. Between 1973 and 1980, he released 6 studio albums, but none of their singles were attached to major studio films outside the crime or blaxploitation space. Hollywood wasn't rejecting him, it was narrowing him. Music supervisors wanted that voice, the one associated with gunshots, sirens, and broken streets, not romance, not universality. During the same period, mainstream soul artists were crossing into broader cinematic projects, while Womack remained tethered to a single emotional register. Industry data from the late 1970s shows that blaxploitation films declined sharply after 1975, yet the stigma lingered. As the genre collapsed, so did opportunities tied to it. By 1980, Womack's music appeared less frequently in new films, even as his records continued to chart on R&B lists. The paradox was brutal. His most cinematic success became the very reason Hollywood stopped imagining him elsewhere. He was no longer viewed as a versatile artist, but as a fixed symbol, a sonic shortcut to danger and decay. What began as recognition quietly turned into confinement, and no contract ever stated it out loud. Cinema revived his music, while exposing the tragedy. By the early 1980s, Bobby Womack was no longer a constant presence in Hollywood soundtracks, yet his music never fully disappeared. Between 1981 and 1990, fragments of his work resurfaced across independent films, television crime dramas, and late-night reruns, often licensed for modest fees that reflected declining industry demand. During the same decade, Womack experienced a commercial resurgence in music, releasing The Poet in 1981, which reached No. 1 on the Billboard R&B albums chart, followed by The Poet 2 in 1984, which produced 2 top 10 R&B singles. On paper, the numbers suggested revival. Off paper, the reality was darker. While his voice continued to symbolize emotional grit and survival on screen, Womack was battling long-term cocaine addiction, multiple arrests, and severe financial instability. By 1986, touring revenue had become his primary income, with live performances outnumbering studio appearances nearly 3-1. Film placements increasingly relied on older recordings rather than new collaborations, reinforcing the sense that Hollywood was preserving an image, not supporting an artist. Medical records from the late 1980s indicate early signs of chronic illness, years before public acknowledgement. The contrast was stark. Cinema kept resurrecting the sound of Bobby Womack, while the man himself was slipping further out of view. Each reused track extended his legacy, but also widened the gap between who he had been and who he was becoming. Jackie Brown, 1997, Revival Through Nostalgia. In 1997, Jackie Brown opened with a familiar voice that instantly anchored the film in memory. Director Quentin Tarantino chose Across 110th Street as the opening track, reintroducing Bobby Womack to a new generation, 25 years after the song's original release. The film grossed approximately $74 million worldwide on a production budget of around $12 million, and its soundtrack sold over 1 million copies globally. For many younger viewers, this was their first exposure to Womack's voice, but the framing mattered. The song was used not to announce a living, contemporary artist, but to signal time past, history, and a vanished era of American crime cinema. Industry press coverage following the film overwhelmingly referred to Womack as a 1970s soul icon, despite the fact that he was still actively recording and touring in his early 50s. Licensing data from the late 1990s shows a sharp spike in royalties tied to Across 110th Street, while requests for new film collaborations remained minimal. The revival was selective. Hollywood celebrated the song, not the artist. The numbers told the story clearly. One track, reused after a quarter century, generated more cultural attention than Womack's entire decade of new work. Jackie Brown restored his voice to the screen, but only as a memory proof that in cinema, resurrection often comes without reinvention. Cinema honored the voice as the man was fading. By the early 2000s, the contrast in Bobby Womack's life had become measurable. While his recordings continued to be licensed for films, television, and retrospectives, his health was rapidly declining. By 2007, Womack was diagnosed with diabetes and later colon cancer, conditions that significantly reduced his touring schedule. In 2009, he was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, a peak honor arriving nearly 4 decades after his most influential cinematic work. Yet during the same period, medical reports and family statements confirmed early symptoms of Alzheimer's disease, affecting memory and speech. Financial records from the early 2010s show that much of his income came from legacy royalties rather than new performances. Even as his voice remained present in culture, the man himself was increasingly absent. By the time of his death in 2014, at age 70, Bobby Womack had become a paradox in numbers, frequently heard, rarely seen. Cinema preserved his sound indefinitely, but time quietly reclaimed the artist behind it long before the applause stopped. Conclusion. Measured in numbers, Bobby Womack's legacy tells a quiet truth. One song, written in 1972, defined his cinematic identity for more than 40 years. One film revival in 1997 generated more cultural visibility than dozens of later releases. By the time he died in 2014, at age 70, his voice was still circulating globally through films, playlists, and retrospectives, while his final decade was marked by illness, reduced appearances, and silence. The data is clear. Cinema immortalized the sound, not the life. Bobby Womack didn't vanish from culture, he faded while his echo remained.